So my name is Samsara, and I guess I would call myself a traditional birth attendant, or one of the terms that we use at the moment is birth keeper. Keeper of physiological birth, supporting women to birth. And I was in the birthing room with birthing moms and their partners and families for about 35 years. I'm now taking a little seat back, and I train doulas or birth keepers and just support families now from a more sitting back place. But I also feel it's important that I pass on everything that I've been learning in these last years. So that's what I'm doing right now. If I might speak to the rise of the feminine, we also have the rise of the abuse of the feminine in the birthing world. So there's a huge rise of disempowered feminine. And this is one of the things I feel passionate about. And I would say that most of my time in the birthing room is just to support a woman who I know knows how to give birth. We don't have to tell her how to do it. We have to create the environment around her so that she can, as you say, bring that feminine principle down and birth her baby. But right now, women don't believe they can do it. They've been so indoctrinated and coerced and groomed into believing their bodies don't work. That we, especially in the UK, we have the largest rise in cesareans. And my question is, where are all these feminine rising? Because a lot of them are lying down to be overrun by the system that is quite a patriarchal economic system of disempowering the feminine. So we really need women to embody the feminine, to not only, rise in the feminine power, but to really embody it and walk it, especially in their feminine cycles. And when it gets down to from up there to down there, and down into the really sweaty, smelly, divine earth, juicy birthing room. And that doesn't happen a lot right now, except if they're with other women who are birth keepers, who are protecting that space so that they can bring birth back into the room in a kind of very healthy physiological way. So, although I am part of the whole 80s movement of the goddess rise of the feminine and second wave feminism that felt we could have it all, I find that your generation feel they have it all, but somehow are losing touch with the very simple fact that birth is an everyday miracle that we're all built and wired to do. But it's not up here, it's down here. I think it starts with acknowledging the wounds we have around the feminine. It starts with the young ones. It starts with working with our daughters, working with the young ones, to really start to feel that embodying the feminine is safe, embodying their bodies is safe, understanding all the kind of ways of the world that coerce and manipulate them to not feel comfortable in their bodies and in their feminine. I think it's about creating community where women and girls feel safe to be able to share the shadow side of the feminine and not disembody and disconnect from the darkness and the grit and the pain and the grief that often comes with these cycles. You talk about the cycle, but there's a death in a cycle, and the cycle of death often brings grief. And I would say in every woman's experience there is grief, and we associate grief with a lot of shame. And I think working with the shame and the grief and the really coming to home in our bodies and feeling comfortable in them, I think that naturally arises women into their power. You can't help but feel power in yourself where you fully love yourself and all the bits about yourself and all the darkness because then the light is just there when we feel our darkness and recognize it and feel comfortable. I would say this weekend in the birth tent, 90% of the women came with grief and trauma and silenced voices. And I think what we create is a space to witness women, and I think community is about witnessing, and every rite of passage has to be witnessed. So wherever we separate ourselves for rite of passage, we need to be witnessed as we go into it, and then witnessed and celebrated when we return. And that's how birth should be. And that's how, to me, supporting in community is that my generation, the ones who've been in the birthing room, who've been in feminine circles for many years, have a place to now hold the younger ones and witness them as they start to move through their cycles of womanhood, and then work with the daughters. And that's what I do. Our first menstruation is a blood mystery. Our first sexual experience is a blood mystery, and our first birth is a blood mystery. And how we are met at birth is how we carry the kind of imprint or the story of each blood mystery. So how we are welcomed at birth, and the tenderness and the welcome and the gentleness then turns up at how we were met at our first menstruation, of our first sexual experience. And we call the birth like it's a reckoning of the feminine, and it's an altar of birth. And if we've not been welcomed at the altars of all these other rites of passage, then of course women don't have any inner guidance of how to be embodied in their birth, and then outsource it as we outsource all other rites of passage in menstruation. I think one of the wonderful things that I discovered putting things together in my own life was that my own grandmother was in England what we call a handy woman. And it's actually a word that we don't really know, but she was born in 1898, my grandmother, so it would have been pre-wars, in between wars. But basically, she is what I do. She supports women through different times in their life, and she would have been there to assist in births and maybe catch babies if women couldn't afford midwives. So it would have been when births was just in, tenement houses. She was there when your children were sick. She was there when somebody hurt themselves and she sewed them up or something, and also when they died, and she would wash and cleanse the body. So that traditionally it then became a kind of an illegal situation where these women often did abortions as well. But before, and women have always taken care of their own fertility needs. So when I pieced together that's what she had done, I just knew that it was an ancestral calling. And it's always been something that, people say, oh, you're a midwife, why don't you become a midwife? Why don't you study midwifery? And I realized that there's something really deeply rooted in my roots into this land, which I am so indigenous to, like 98%. This is my home, my earth, my mud, my soil, is that I just wanted to carry through what's called a lay profession. There's not many lay professions, and I guess I've always been an edge dweller, a hedge dweller, just moving in between the systems. And I love that a birthkeeper still holds, and I'm so proud of that tradition. And many people who come to birthing world, they appropriate and they want to learn from indigenous cultures what we can, but it doesn't always kind of relate to where our indigenous roots come, because it suits theirs and their story and their culture and ancient myths and, you know, how that worked. We wove somewhere totally different. And, you know, I think what we call the witch wound, or it, you know, we feel that much of this knowledge got lost like 400 years ago with the burning of many women, and a lot of them would have been witches or the wise women or the kind of village herbalists and everything, and a lot of the wisdom was lost. But I was kind of like, it hasn't been lost, it's just like gone to sleep, and we need to remember it. And I think many birth keepers are fascinated in many traditional indigenous things like herbalism or body work, or kind of just working with nature and bringing that into supporting women. So it is a deep remembering of what's in my bones. And I would always say that my nanny has my back, and if I want to remember something, I just have to feel her supporting me to remember what has been lost, because it hasn't really. We just have to wake up to it, and then it's appropriate. We need to sometimes change it to what's relevant to young people today. And, you know, in my lifetime, birth culture has changed so dramatically that, you know, to think back how it was in her day has, you know, we have to change it for the times. So yes, I'm very much into remembering what we would have done. And there's very little research, but it's there, because it wasn't a written thing. Birth was such an everyday event, and women often didn't write. It wasn't seen necessary to write about it, because it would have just been passed down from midwife to apprentice, or grandmother to, you know, daughter. So I feel she's my indigenous roots that is passing down her wisdom to me. And I would say that it's passing down to my daughters. Although their work is far from birth work, they are the best doulas already. I've witnessed them with their friends, and they have it in their bones and their blood to know how to care for women in their birthing time. So yeah, the word I love to use in birth is emergence, and it is. And it's an amazing time in birth when you're journeying with someone during a labor and during their birth. That time when the baby starts to make their journey earthside, the woman goes through this massive transition, and they call it transition. But it's almost like when she is in labor land, she is in this altered state. It actually changes from theta to beta into the meditative state. So she's in this other world anyway, and she is over the veil. She's in another world, and it's very disturbing to reach her in that world. That's when things go wrong. When the first interference in birth is to remove a woman from that space, like remove her from her home, is the first interference that we intervention, and we intervene with birth, and we sabotage it when we remove her from that other world. And then there's this moment where her body is open enough to start the journey of the baby earthside. And there's these wonderful, and they are from other cultures, but we have them where a woman goes to the stars to reach for her baby, and she brings back the baby from the other world. But in those moments, she often feels she's going to die. Every woman I've ever met says, I can't do this anymore, I'm going to die, this is all too much. This is often the time where you see it in the movies, where it's all dramatic. But she comes back across that veil, and she comes back into her body, because she knows that she has the work of pushing this baby through the birth canal. And actually it's a physiological change as well, because she gets a lot of adrenaline at that point. So she's fully like, am I safe? Can I do this? Have I got the strength? And she's moved across the veils. But it's still a really important time never to disturb her and never to question her. And she often reaches up. A woman often reaches physically in an African tradition, they call it opening the back. And we lie women down on their back. They need to be up so they can reach their baby and allow their baby down that journey. And you're right, it's really the first time a baby has deep sensations, like deep physical sensations. And it's related in their heart rate, and if we are busily putting drugs into them, they will stress out. But if a mum is just in her own world, the baby will, and she trusts and she's communicating with baby, the baby will be fine, but the baby is pushed. And that's part of our birth experience and birth story, to be pushed through this journey. And sometimes it takes a really long time, and sometimes babies just fly out. And there's this lovely piece, I feel, and I often ask couples how they were born. And as that's our first rite of passage, it's often how we walk through the world. So if a person has a forceps birth, they often feel that they're being pulled or forced into doing something. If a baby is kind of very fast, they often are really, really kind of like, always in that kind of like speed. It often relates to their birth, how we, as we talked about, it's our first rite of passage. It imprints our passage through the world. So it is super, super mystical and magical. And I love it. It is the word between the worlds, betwixt and between. It's almost like the wasteland, and it's the veil, and it's misty, and we lose a woman, and then when she comes back and goes, I'm gonna birth this baby, then you know that we have a baby coming. Because she does. She suddenly comes back into that place. So.